think we're live. So, hello and welcome to the Bible School Show live Q&A. We try to run this every month, and if you haven't heard of the Bible School Show and you're just seeing this, because we just open up for everybody to ask questions if you'd like. The Bible School Show is this online kind of course and community where we're trying to understand Jesus better, love to learn more about him, and we try to do that through these three areas: Bible study, theology, and church history. So if you'd like to join the Bible School Show anytime, either during the stream or anything like that, you can on our website, bibleschool.show. And actually, there's an entire sample show on the website as well, if you'd like. Okay, so today is our live Q&A. We try to do this, if we can, on the first Wednesday of every month. Right, so we have a few questions. We have some kind of prep from last time, and some we've received over the week, and some today actually as well. So we're going to start with the first one that we're just going to go for. Before we do as well, if you have any questions while you're watching, feel free to drop them in the YouTube comment section, and we will do our best to cover them within the hour if we can. Okay, so the very first questions we had, and we wanted to kind of cover this as well, was this idea and topic of the flight from Egypt. So that's when Jesus was to Egypt, sorry. But that's I'm thinking of the prophecy, really. The flight to Egypt of Jesus when he was a baby, partly because this is during this Candlemas time. I think that was a week ago, wasn't it? Was that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, so the Candlemas is on the 2nd, and then on the 4th, Western calendars will celebrate the flight to Egypt. But like Egyptian and Ethiopian Christians, they'll have loads of days throughout the year to celebrate it. Obviously, Jesus taking refuge in Africa, they love that, so they give it a lot. Whereas like we'll have reminders of Christmas throughout the year. We have Johnmas, and we have the conception, and we have, all of that. But they have a lot of flight to Egypt stuff, which is great.
Yeah. So and particularly the Candlemas is it the Magi visiting and then the flight bit in particular?
Yeah, well, Candlemas is Simeon, isn't it?
Yeah.
That prophecy. So that's like 40 days after Jesus is born, and then it kind of like Candlemas Tide, which is from Candlemas to Carnival. Yeah. Is a time when we think about Jesus' childhood, like all the way through. So we can think about the presentation at the temple, not presentation, it is confirmation at the temple, at 12. But then also flight to Egypt and what he did there, and other stories. Medievals have lots of stories of him as a kid. Yeah. Me and Dad were looking at Mary of Agreda. We talk about her a lot, and she has some good stories. She's always good.
Yep, definitely. Well, we won't probably cover it now, but there is actually a lot on Jesus as an infant, in what kind of an infant he was as well, with hymns and carols also battling it out for their theology of what a baby Jesus acted like. But anyway, we're not covering that right now. Right now, we just want to talk about the flight to Egypt. So in particular, just a little bit of it in the Bible. So you might remember it was, I'll try and bring it up quickly. So in Matthew, let me try and bring it up. So obviously, beginning of Matthew. Sorry, I didn't have it up. I had a Hosea up. And I'll say why in a second. Right. So if you remember the story, we're around this time. This is this flight to Egypt. So this is because in Matthew chapter 2, as you know, the Magi came to visit Jesus, baby Jesus, asking for the Messiah to go see him. And when they did, Herod, and it actually says all Jerusalem as well. Okay. So I'll just turn the audio up. I heard somebody sent a message saying, right, I've just turned it up. Hope that's okay. Right. Yes. So the flight to Egypt happens because the Magi, who obviously remember the example of the great Christian Daniel, were expecting this Messiah, this king, who was actually going to really own the entire earth. All nations would serve this baby King Jesus, and they knew it, and they were waiting because Daniel had prophesied all about it. So anyway, the Magi come saying, we know this Messiah's been born. We want to go see him. Herod doesn't like the fact that there is this king of all the earth who's not him. And then, though, Herod basically causes baby Jesus and this family to escape to Egypt. So that's in Matthew chapter 2. But this is what's so interesting about this is this Matthew says is fulfilling a prophecy. So Matthew 2, I'll read verses 14 and 15. Right, or I'll read the bit before, actually. So when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, and take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Now that is a reference to Hosea 11 verse 1, which that whole chapter and even the verse before is actually quite interesting about the fact that actually Jesus is going to die. This King of Israel is in fact going to have to die. It's just not then. That's not the moment. But Hosea 11 verse 1 is what it's referencing. And one of the thoughts I just wanted to give on it before we kind of open it, and we were talking about this earlier today, is why is it that Jesus, there was this prophecy, there was this need for Jesus to come out of Egypt? Why did he have to do kind of like the same journey that those patriarchs in the Bible, why did he have to do that journey? And we were talking about, and we were thinking, it's more likely actually that the patriarchs in the Bible were trying to do the Jesus journey. And the reason we were saying this is actually because Jesus does this flight to Egypt once, and then he comes back as a baby. And then, obviously, this out of Egypt I've called my son happens. Is that on the microphone? Okay.
Yeah. You have to put your volume up more. It's the problem, I think, because of me coming in from Wales and causing...
It could be. Yeah. Is this better, Leslie? I've only just turned up the volume. I don't know if that's okay. I hope if that's too loud, just set a message, because that could be too loud. Yes. So we're trying to talk about how it's actually probably more likely the patriarchs were doing the Jesus pilgrimage, because we were thinking Abraham, I believe, does this trip to and out of Egypt. He does it. Jacob does it. Joseph does it. And then Moses does it. So it's actually probably more likely they are each doing this prophecy about how Jesus really is going to come out of Egypt, and the church is also going to go through this journey. So we were thinking it's probably more likely that it's a they were actually doing a prophecy forwards about this event rather than it's actually the other way around.
And part of that, you see there's some other prophets who kind of only mention going into Egypt in the context of Jesus going into, because we think about Ezekiel 30:13-19 talks about the Lord going into Egypt. And you get the same in Isaiah 19:1-3. So you get the Lord himself going into Egypt. And so they don't say, oh, the Lord will do this because Abraham did it, or anything. It's just talking about... So sometimes prophets are just thinking about just Jesus going into Egypt. So it does seem like, and we think Abraham knows loads about what will happen in the life of Christ and all of that. So that is something, isn't it, where you get it sometimes in the scripture where it's just talking about... So like Jesus is the archetypal... That flight to Egypt is where it all comes from.
And then one of the questions we're thinking on the why of it, and we might ask Dad what your thought on it is, but we're thinking possibly the why on it is this idea of, although I had quite a lot of thoughts actually, this idea that Jesus has to kind of, so one of it we thought is the idea that he's got to come out of the world, that it's the Father's, it's almost this paradox in which his son, the Heavenly Father's Son in heaven has to come out of this kind of worldly place. And Egypt, as we know in the Exodus, is this whole thing of calling the church out of worldliness and their worship of everything kind of earthly. And it's almost like, essentially, it's this paradox of how that's going to happen with Jesus as well, who the person from heaven being called out of this worldly place, really to serve the Lord and do his job. So we're thinking on that. There were other things we had as well, this idea of Egypt actually as this kind of place of like no want. It's this place of kind of like a brilliant place with no...
Can I bring up that? Yeah, in 1 Kings 11, you get one of my favourite stories in the Bible, but loads of people don't know this story, which I think is just utterly tragic, because it is, far and away one of the best stories in the entire Bible.
Is it?
What happened is the Joab, who of course he's that guy where you've got Abner, son of Ner, is this amazing general. Joab like kills him, and he's this very flawed person who's very focused on his own aggrandization and so on. So he kills all the Edomites except for one child, and this child gets taken into Egypt and he's raised with Pharaoh in Pharaoh's palace. But then the Lord has raised him up to attack Solomon, for when Solomon goes evil, he will then oppose Solomon. So then Edom gets taken into exile and then into Egypt, exile in Egypt, and then they have to come out. So we've talked a lot about
that's
Edomites.
Your secret reason why you like this story.
That is true. We have mentioned in previous streams, I'm a massive fan of the Edomites. I have defended them before, and I will continue to do so.
So you should.
Yeah. So that is part of the reason I've noticed this story, but it is a good one. And then because I think it explains, Hadad and Pharaoh have this little dialogue, which I think explains so much of this flight to Egypt and like what we're meant to think about when it comes to living in Egypt and then leaving it. Because Hadad says, "Let me go so I may return to my own country." And then Pharaoh asks, "What have you lacked here that you want to go to your own country?" And Hadad says, "Absolutely nothing. Nevertheless, I must go." And that is what Jesus, like, that's how we're supposed to think of Jesus going into Egypt and all the patriarchs and everything going into Egypt. What do you lack in Egypt? Absolutely nothing. It's this place of plenty. Nevertheless, I have to go. It's that sort of, and then we were thinking as well, or do you want to cover this? But that Jesus leaving heaven is that. What does he lack in heaven? Absolutely nothing. And he's like, so then you can imagine the angels asking Pharaoh's question to Jesus. It's like, what have you lacked here in heaven that you're wanting to go to that country? And Jesus says, absolutely nothing. Nevertheless, I must go. And it's that sort of thing with Egypt, I think we thought a little bit about, but we thought loads, but yeah.
What are your thoughts on it? Yeah.
All good thoughts. The story of Egypt is such a big part in the Bible, going back to Joseph and all of those things, and the way that there is this idea that Joseph, is killed, not really killed, but left for dead in a tomb, taken out of the tomb, goes to Egypt, and then that again happens where he's put down in a dungeon, brought up again, but then he ascends to reign in this heavenly Egypt, and then they come his brethren from that land, and then again he can't, and then the book ends with them going back from Egypt to that promised land. So again, there's very much this idea of Joseph being raised up to the right hand of the throne in Egypt. So Egypt does have this kind of very grand symbolism, and all the way through this going in and out of Egypt and going back to the promised land. But also the idea that Jesus should have an Exodus experience, and it's as if the Exodus didn't happen as it was supposed to do. They were supposed to just in a few days go from Egypt to the promised land, completely casting off the world and going into this new creation experience. But they didn't do that. They were attracted back to the world, and they didn't have a true exodus. But in Psalm 18, when Jesus is praying to be rescued, it's all the language of this experience for everything to be complete. And so, again, all of that is in the background, and that probably, Jonathan, that is what the Hosea thing's all about. Out of Egypt I call myself. And it's like people sometimes think that's referring to the original Exodus in the book of Exodus, but of course, as you rightly said, no, it's only secondarily that the primary reference is Jesus having the Exodus, because it's him that he's the only one who can bring about the total Exodus, the way out from slavery. He's the only one who can really do that. So
yeah. And another thing we were thinking before, could I just cover that quickly, where like you were looking at some of the places that get mentioned that the Lord will reach out to. And with the wise men, because they're magi, they kind of represent Babylon and Assyria, and they come at that moment. But then, as you said, they're very connected in the story of reaching Egypt. So that you got the East coming to Jesus, but then Jesus going into the West to reach them, so that there is an element of like going out to make disciples of all nations being at the very core. It's very important in the Gospel of Matthew, isn't it? That he talks about Gentiles being saved, and he includes those examples, isn't it, of the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South he mentions, and all of that. So it's really at the heart of Matthew's kind of gospel, but it's an important thing as well that we see the great cities from the East coming to see Jesus going to see the great cities of the West.
Because Matthew does seem to have a big focus on global church for all nations. As given by the very final verse as well. But yeah, I think that's huge.
PJ, do you want to just say a quick comment about the possible Bible mentoring that Jesus enjoyed when he went to Egypt?
Well, yeah, so we think, we've thought a lot about, the Coptic people. We were saying Copts celebrate loads about the flight to Egypt and the various stops along the way they have. And they say he didn't go to Alexandria, but he did go to the city of On, Heliopolis. And some people say he lived there for years and years even. Some people say that he spent a total of like 6 years in Egypt. So he could have spent quite a long time there. And we know that there's a guy who used to go to On quite often who was called Philo. And you'll know the name instantly if you've watched a few of these streams. We do quote Philo a lot. Saint Philo of Alexandria, he was this person who kind of ran this school and wrote loads of great works, and it was a school that was founded by the prophet Simeon, who's also part of the Christmas story, or Simeon helped found it, 300 years before, and we've covered that story as well. But do go watch previous streams to catch up on that you got the Simeon guy who goes to Alexandria and he helps translate all the Old Testament into Greek, and that starts this tradition of this like Jewish school in Alexandria that teaches Jews and Greeks about the gospel, preparing the way for Jesus. And Saint Philo is one of the greatest deans this school ever had. One of the greatest teachers it ever produced, and he wrote loads of works, and there are even more works he wrote that we don't have access to, because of the ravages of time. But from what we have, absolutely incredible, and we quote him all the time for good reason. And so we think this guy, he often went to the city of On, because there was one prophecy that said, in the city of On, the Lord will put a temple. And so when loads of these Israelites went into exile, about 300 BC, into Egypt, some of them set up this temple in On. They were like, that's what the Lord's calling us to do. So then Philo would sacrifice there. And he only, maybe a couple of times, went to Jerusalem to do it. He had a lot of confidence in the city of On. And then if you do have some kind of searching app, look through whenever On appears in scripture. It's an interesting place. Philo must have had a lot of interesting thoughts about it as well. Anyway, so Jesus stays in On for years, tradition says, and then Philo goes to On every year to sacrifice. So he must have met. And then when you read this book and he has this amazing expectation in Jesus, he talks like he's met him. And then we think, well, of course, everyone who reads scripture can talk like we've met. We have met him in scripture. But there is a part of you that thinks, well, he must have actually met him. And that sort of confidence, he has the confidence an apostle has, where it does feel like sometimes the apostles have like an extra bit of confidence. We should be as confident as them, but maybe we're not always. But Philo, he totally reads like that, doesn't he? Where he's like an apostle. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that think over the years, that Philo must have met the little baby Jesus in one of these trips to the city of On. And Jesus must have sacrificed there because he couldn't go back to the Temple of Jerusalem. But, we know, it's mentioned in Luke that the family kept doing all the pilgrimages and festivals. So, of course, they must have gone to On. So they will have been in the same crowd. That's the thing that's gotten people over the years, like, thinking, like, oh, they were in the same room at the same time. Like, they must have met because of everything Philo says. And if not, like when Philo got to heaven and it got revealed to him, and he'll be like, oh, like I could have just said hi, that would have been so cool. But loads of people think they must have said hi at least.
Is it true? Is it true that Philo, is it within the very first verse, or is it the second or third verses? He's already said there must be this word, this son who explains the Father.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if my volume's better now, but I'll talk anyway. But the Philo, because the language of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Son is, people often think that's a New Testament thing, but Philo believes that's clear in the first 3 chapters of the Bible. I mean, he knows that it's the Logos, the Word, in the first, I don't know, like 2 or 3 verses of Genesis. He's like gone big on everything is created by the Logos, through the Logos, for the Logos, all that, because everything is by the voice of the Lord. And Philo's huge on that. And he's probably writing those sort of things in about what we would call 0 BC, when he's probably about 30, 40 years age. So before even Jesus arrives in Egypt, Philo's teaching basically the Trinity from the opening verse of Genesis. But he notes, when he's meditating on the creation of humanity and how human beings have children and all that, he's very clear that is reflective of the Father and the Son in the Trinity. And that language of a father who begets a son, so important, because it means that he's of the same nature. Like creation is, and I've just been reading Gregory of Nyssa over the past few days, and he's later, I mean, Philo has this stuff earlier, but Gregory of Nyssa, he's in the 4th century, and he's great because he constantly draws attention to this language of father and son and the importance of it, that the son is begotten from the father. So he's not created, because a creature isn't of the same species, whereas, a tiger gives birth to a tiger, or a horse gives birth to a horse. So the father, begets the son, and therefore the son has the same life, the same DNA, the same being as the father. But of course, it's not that there was a time when the father didn't have the son, and then there was a time he decided to beget the son. Because again, what Gregory of Nyssa makes the point, that that would mean he wasn't the father. There must have been a time when he wasn't the father, and you can't have that. He's always the father. Or if you think of it in terms of his word, you couldn't have him unable to speak, or without his logic. And so the Father and the Son always get, but it's like you can use the idea of God and his word, or the Lord and his voice, but it's really good to keep that language of Father and Son central, so that we understand that they are of the same. The Creed would put it in slightly abstract language as homoousion. But the Bible, although the Bible does have a bit of that sort of thing, it really prefers personal language of Father and Son and that sort of thing. But it's not wrong to use the creed language, I think, although some of the Nicene Fathers were a bit uncomfortable with such abstract language. They preferred to stick closer to biblical language. But nevertheless, we get the point when they say homoousia, the same being, because Father and Son. Anyway, I've gone off topic a little bit there, but Philo was big on that sort of stuff.
And worth saying that St. Origen was a successor of St. Philo. He mentions this like over 14 times, that his school was the successor to Philo's. And he's the one who came up with the word homoousion. And so Constantine added it to the creed, but like Origen kind of coins the term. So it is actually from this tradition. And another phrase, and you brought this up another time, another phrase St. Philo sort of coined is light from light, which also makes it into the creed. So this sort of is quite important, that a lot of our kind of Trinitarian language is inherited from Philo, which, as you're saying, in stuff he was writing before he met Jesus, even though we know he met Jesus, but like even before he met him in the flesh, he was writing this sort of stuff, language we still use, like God the Son, light from light, homoousion, or maybe Philo didn't use homoousion, but he inspired it in St. Origen, his successor. So it is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. One, obviously, I love, obviously, the early Psalms, so I just wanted to mention as well the idea that Jesus kind of is begotten, but also was always this Son. I always find it, Psalm 2:7, to kind of, it's almost this contradiction that the Bible just uses personal language, but also gets, this is a very complicated thing that's happening. Psalm 2:7, where he said to me, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." So even there, the Bible's like, you are, like, Jesus is this eternal Son of the Father, and yet there is like a moment where it's as if that becomes doubly true, which the Bible's
you
like,
already are my son, but today I've begotten you.
Yeah. So even the Bible, which again uses this very personal language, gets that this is a very complicated thing that's happening, but again, that's how it deals with it in relationships and stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I love Psalm 2, particularly.
Oh yes, and another thing, just before I forget, because we'll move on to another topic, but just when it comes to the flight to Egypt, because a lot of people, like the Egyptian government is trying to double down on it. They're building new churches, they're rebuilding old churches, and they're defending pilgrimage sites, because we know there's a lot of Islamic extremism even in the Sinai Peninsula. Where some of these sites are, and they're really trying to like focus on securing the Christian communities in these areas, particularly with the Holy Family's route in mind. So, but some people in the West laugh this off. So you think there's loads of great stuff happening, but some people undermine it, which is quite annoying. And they're like, "Oh, it's all just made up stuff," and they get it from nowhere. And it's all, well, actually, the places they list are in Scripture. And if you read Ezekiel 30 verses 13 to 19, you will see those places listed. When it lists all the places that the Lord will visit, it mentions he will put an end to the idols of Memphis. He'll spread fear in the land. He'll waste Upper Egypt, set fire to Zoan, inflict punishment on Thebes. So that all sounds like, he's going to destroy things and everything. But we know, because we've talked about Jonah, when Jonah says, "I'm going to destroy Nineveh," he knows he's actually going to save it. So when the Lord is saying, "I'm going to utterly burn Zoan," what he's saying is he's going to go there and save them. And so it's the same. So all these places that get listed, Zoan, Thebes, Pelusium, Heliopolis, we mentioned, Bubastis, Tapanese. So their list of places he went to, the itinerary, they haven't just come up with it out of nowhere, though there is the tradition that, they've handed this on. But even if you don't believe that, Ezekiel said he promised us the Lord was going to visit those cities, and pretty much that order. So, that is something to keep in mind, and that we shouldn't be undermining this amazing project that's going on, that's really helping churches, growing churches, and it's got the backing of the government and everything to see this kind of like Cyrus moment happen. I think it's really important to say that it has its basis in Scripture.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And to support
Egypt, it won't be long before Egypt is yet again majority Christian nation producing the greatest theologians in the world.
Yeah. Well, they already produced the greatest theologians, didn't they? Like Tadros Malachi, we quote a lot, Shenouda. So they're not even the majority yet, but they're still, they're still coming out swinging.
One thing we might have to do just in 3 minutes is I might have to just restart the Zoom call, Dad. And
do that then.
So should we do that now, and then quickly we can go on to the next question?
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to end it and restart it. So hopefully... Oh, no, yeah, I'll send it.
Yeah, the stream should... Yeah.
Let's see. Right. Oh, that... Okay. Tell you what, then. Oh, man. Can I do this quickly or not?
Your bank details are streaming.
No, not the bank details. Okay, sorry everyone. I'm just gonna see if I can get this going.
Oh, they've got an AI companion. At no additional cost.
Why? Yeah. Okay. Have they cheated me out of that? Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I can actually do this. Why?
Have you not upgraded yet?
They Oh my word. No, I can't.
You can't buy the...
I don't understand why this is such a problem. Nope. Right, okay.
And you doubted that there were goblins after Candlemas, and look at the tech problems you're having.
Don't even start.
That was a clear goblin interference, if I've ever seen any.
What was the rhyme you guys were saying at Candlemas?
Yeah, as many leaves as there shall be, so many goblins shall you see.
So we had to... Isn't it you're meant to keep decorations up until Candlemas?
Yes, and then you have to take them down. So the decorations used to be holly and ivy and that sort of thing. And you'd burn it on a big bonfire, because Candlemas, it's like a feast of light. It's the light dawning on the Gentiles sort of thing. So, yeah, you'd make a big bonfire from all your old Christmas decorations. Obviously, it's not advisable to burn plastic. So I think, hopefully, you will not have a goblin infestation if it's in the cellar or in the attic or whatever you've got. But it is nevertheless important to get rid of your Christmas decorations in time or get ready to get rid of it in time.
Yeah.
But it's on Candlemas you have to do it. And preferably make a bonfire, celebrate Jesus as the light to the world, sort of thing. But yeah, that's it. The goblins, you got to watch out for goblins. But it's not just England that has that. So there's that old English rhyme. But it's not just England. In Greece, at the end of the Christmas celebrations, you got to get rid of that, or else you get goblins. They can be bought off with leucomades. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is a kind of donut. And similarly, they don't have goblins in Iceland. They have gnomes, but gnomes can also be bought off with donuts. So, if you're busy on Candlemas and you're like, I just can't get a bonfire for all my holly and ivy and everything, do consider investing in some donuts. And if you throw them on your roof, the gnomes or goblin or whatever you're afflicted with will eat those instead. So that's just something to keep in mind. And as I say, these technical difficulties are clear proof. Johnny was scoffing at the idea of goblins tormenting us, but look at this happening live.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It might be we just have to go on, I think, without Dad. So in which case, what I'm going to try is right. Let me just see if this is going to work. No. Okay.
Well, you've got a calming stream there. I mean, why not have it like a relaxing sort of...
Oh, my word.
Yeah, let's just have a relaxing stream while we, in a relaxed manner, talk about the next questions. I mean, maybe a calming setting is ideal, because I think we'll be talking about some heavy topics.
All right. So if that's the case, then, if we are failing, everything is... for some reason...
For goblinoid reasons.
Because that's not real. Okay. So one of the questions we had next was, is it good to fast in Lent? Obviously some of the church history on this, I imagine, will be big. Just before, obviously, you do go forward with it, obviously at St. Crispin's, we do actually fast every month. And we do it partly for that main reason that we... because Jesus says to fast and to pray. Wasn't it getting rid of demons? He says that's what you need as for the to gain. Really, it's a connection, because one of the reasons why it's so important, both fasting, praying, and Bible reading, is that's what Jesus does. He does that to prepare for his fight with the devil. So anyway, that's one of the reasons we do it, fasting, particularly because it. Yeah, it is this... Sorry, I was trying to fix the Zoom if I could.
You can't outsmart the goblins.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons is... it's kind of like, as we were saying, the flight from to Egypt, but it's the Exodus moment. People were to come away from that wilderness and really to, as Jesus put it, to not live on bread alone. That's the kind of idea of fasting. It's to not trust in things, or really to kind of believe our life is supported, held by Jesus and God alone. He is our strength, our salvation. And it's kind of just to make that very physically obvious to us. Anyway, what were you going to say, Pete, on that? On fasting in Lent, particularly the church history of it.
Well, I think it ties into some of this flight to Egypt stuff in that sense, where you're trying to participate. You're trying to... So as we thought, like, Moses, he's trying to do what Jesus had surely promised to do. So that was an imitation of Christ. It is important to imitate Christ. I think as well that there's this practical element that so some people feel it's more pious to do ad hoc fasting, and it's just like when it's time to like be sorry for something, let's just fast then. The difficulty of that, practically speaking, is that whole thing where you're meant to kind of keep it private and you're not meant to brag and everything. If you do it all together, everyone in church knows that it's fasting time, everyone's fasting. So then no one is bragging over the others because everyone's fasting, we're all in it together. And also, you don't have to say, oh, by the way, I'm fasting, like, don't get me this food, or don't, Everyone knows. Everyone's kind of in it together, in the Christian community, at least. So that is a practical thing, which whenever I've fasted, I've found that really helps, that you do when you're trying to think, I'm trying to make sure my left hand doesn't know what my right hand's doing. I think that it has a massive practical application. And so many things that we see from the Didache, which was this summary of Jesus' teaching the apostles wrote in the second half of the first century, that mentions things like Lent and fasting and those sort of practices. So much of that is incredibly practical. And so, of course, if anything practical ceases helping, then you can get rid of it. And the Apostle Paul has lots to say about that sort of thing, where it's like, we're not beholden to the letter of this law sort of thing. We're trying to have, the law on our hearts, and then we all, so someone who's got the law in his heart, but he's not outwardly circumcised, all of that stuff. I don't need to repeat Romans. But that sort of thing obviously still applies. So obviously the apostles are no better than Moses in that sense. So anything the apostles instituted, if it's no longer helpful, that we don't need to feel fixed with that. But I think it is still actually, even now, more helpful than ever to try and, when we're fasting, have it as a team effort, that we're all in it together. And that is best done if there's set times. So as you say, in St. Crispin's, it's every month there's a day. But then having a bit of a longer stint is something a lot, and that's what Lent is. It's like, let's all do this. And then we all have different abilities, and St. John Chrysostom mentions that as well. Like,
go to that first. And
then, because this is more biased, but I think you'll be going into the English kind of angle. But for St. John Chrysostom, he's like, not everyone can fast. So, but if you have a period where it's like, look, I'm trying to give up stuff, or I'm trying to take on better habits and things, that's something you can do. So everyone can decide to do something within their ability, and we're all chipping in together. If it's a time where it's like, all right, let's basically fast. That's our basic goal. If you can't do that, there's loads of other stuff. And he says those who cannot fast, they should give to the poor, or they should, there's stuff you can do. And because it's a time, a season of the year, with a general theme of like repenting and of fasting and getting rid of worldliness and that sort of thing, there's loads of ways you can go about it. So actually, a time of fasting does not mean everyone's beholden to fast. Some churches do it that way, and that's very unhelpful, and they look down on people who cannot fast, and they might have good reasons they cannot fast. So that is very bad whenever that happens. But the time of fasting overall is a good thing. It's an inclusive thing, in if you want to use that sort of terminology. It is a great way for making sure everyone can get involved with stuff that's very important. And so, not everyone can fast, but it is crucial that... is it all working now, the tech? Is it?
Yeah, keep going.
Right. So not everyone can fast, but it's crucial that you do something that is like, that we don't just treat the gospel as something that's like only kind of in our minds or only in our hearts and everything. Like, it's something we put into practice. And fasting is a very kind of an easy way. It's also a difficult way, but I suppose maybe it's a simple way. It's like quite simple, the logic of it. It's like, we think we depend on food. We shouldn't depend on food. We should depend on Jesus. So I think fasting is very good, and a period of fasting is, and 40 days, that's in imitation of Christ. That's a very important thing. Although it's kind of like 46 days and everything, because they let you have Sundays off, because it's also impious to work, on Sunday in a way.
This is where, is where, though, when we were looking into fasts, and we found it hilarious when going through British fasts, so it would be more ancient fasts in maybe hotter countries, you would it would be as true as can be, like a kind of 40-day fast. But then it was like, when we were looking over these British fasts, they just ever more kind of like, you can take Sundays off.
Yeah.
If you get invited to houses, you've got to accept that, because that's church fellowship.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
you're allowed to eat fish and heaven. You're allowed. So it's not like fasting. It's just like skip it, and then and you can eat after a certain time in the day. And originally that was going to be in the evening, like, you can have tea then. But then, on the 9th hour they had it. So then the English monks kept moving the 9th hour further and further back until it became noon, which is where we get the word noon. So nones is the 9th hour, and then noon means, the 9th hour. So when we say noon, and that for midday, and you might wonder where that term comes from, it's from that. It's from like a weird loophole. So that fasting only meant skipping breakfast. And even then, it just means not having bacon or sausage with your breakfast. So that is definitely, I think, where... There's kind of good reason for that. Because, like, if you're in a cold area, you burn more calories.
It is harder. But we just found it hilarious where it was, we were like trying to find good fasts, and then ever more, they were just allowing more away. Whereas, obviously, Jesus, 40-day no food, and then Elijah as well, and he's running during it. Although he does have a special breakfast from Jesus, two of them, and then he gets super big, super powered. Okay.
So we've got that question there about what are the different kinds of fasts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it is interesting. Like British versus Ethiopian, because in Ethiopia everyone fasts at Lent, but then there's debate about other periods where there should be more periods or fewer. So at one point, when the Syrian church was being persecuted as much as it was, the Syrians had a fast in imitation of their Ninevite ancestors who were fasting because of Jonah. So they have the Ninevite fast, and so Ethiopians said, we'll start doing that in kind of solidarity with them. But then not all Ethiopians do, because some of them are like, wow, there's no, because you don't want to lose the kind of joy in the year, and if you keep doing this, and it's like, well, this country fasts in this time, so let's have solidarity, you can end up with the majority of the year being fasting. And that can do one or two things. So we saw it can make you not take fasting seriously and then add too many loopholes, because we literally cannot fail to eat 200 days in the year. Or maybe you could, but it can be tough if you're working hard.
It's also just not accurate to the law, because God in the
there are more
during the
feasts
Exodus,
than fast,
yeah, exactly. You're meant to be, as you said, there are more events of feasting, even if the fasting time might be quite long in total. There are more feasts, more times to celebrate. So yeah, definitely fasting the whole year is actually also an unbiblical, ungodly thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, you can lose something there. So there, I know there's a bit of contention, I suppose, between Ethiopian communities about exactly which fasts. And so there's some people who are very monastic in a way, and so they're saying, no, we should be doing all the fasts, and they'll be calling out, it's like, look how impious Ethiopia is getting. Although from a British perspective, it seems kind of complaining over nothing. It's like, oh, everyone totally fasts over Lent, but then only some do in the Ninevite fast, and it's like, oh, it doesn't feel like the total moral collapse we're having. But I suppose they might have a point. It's like a domino effect. It might, end up having that sort of effect. We'll have to wait and see, but I think so that's one of the effects it can have, though, isn't it, where you fast too much, so either the whole place can become very miserable, and then, as you say, that's not in line with the law, or you can just see it all as loopholes, and then you never fast at all, really, because when it's like, let's fast, they don't even stock meat around Lent.
I just got a message on that. Do you want to read?
In Ethiopia, they don't even stock meat around Lent and Advent time. Us non-Orthodox basically fast with them because you can't get any meat.
Yeah,
I heard
so
that.
It's like a national.
They do. It's like a proper sign of being Christian, and they get surprised if they when they hear in the West that people don't fast. One person I was hearing who went to Ethiopia said they don't ask, are you Christian, the way we might, they might, are you a follower of Jesus, these sort of questions we have. They instead ask, do you fast? And that means being a Christian in a way. And so they're so shocked when there's people who call themselves Christians and don't, because, in the Bible it is that people fast and pray if they're Christian. And then it is shocking, actually, for Ethiopians, but it should be shocking for us, maybe, when people don't fast as a part of their walk with Jesus, because it is something Jesus says to do, and it is imitating Christ in a way that most people can do. And as Chrysostom said, if you cannot, there's other things you can give up and things, and that perspective maybe is over, because in Lent now, people in the Anglican tradition just kind of give up something. Or take up a good habit. So that Chrysostom's advice everyone has taken was, he was just saying, do it if you cannot fast. So again, it's English people finding loopholes.
Always the minimum.
The minimum, isn't it? And so we've ended up from properly fasting over Lent to just skipping breakfast to not even skipping breakfast.
Didn't you say as well? Because there was that rule where if you got invited by church, you're supposed to eat. Because again. It's the priority is church fellowship. It's church unity, and fellowship is so paramount that even individual kind of holiness is meant to, in a way, kind of be second to church unity. But then,
then you would, as you think, with this kind of mindset, you'd always be having feasts. And we because we've fasted before and everything, we had similar things where, whenever there was a church feast on, we would be like, we've got to go. Which wasn't all bad, because we were going to church a bit more in a way. So that, it is swings and roundabouts and everything. And it did make us really value church fellowship time. Even though we should have done, the spiritual food is so good that we should have always loved that. Nevertheless, it did give us the perspective we needed, and there's something to be said for that. But and I think what makes people cynical is seeing that degradation. So then they just give up on the whole project, and that's such a silly thing to do, because you can see people's faith degrading. Do we give up on faith? You can see churches, pews emptying. Do we give up on churches? And it's such a silly thing to do. And obviously the reason is people don't want to fast. So then once fasting comes on the chopping block, then they don't do anything to help it.
Once you give up giving up, then it's all over.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And you get that as well. Like in the Council of Jerusalem, isn't it? They don't get rid of all the dietary laws. They're like, all right, let's just keep it to the bare minimum. Let's make sure that...
Oh, that's true. No blood. That's it. They're like, just no blood. Yeah.
Yeah, all food sacrificed to idols and things.
That's true.
But some people don't even do that. Like, and so there was massive controversy when Muslims were first in Europe, when they first invaded Europe in the 7-11, about whether to eat halal meat. And that question should be coming up more. You know what I mean? Because there's a halal meat in a lot of places, but it kind of doesn't. And also blood. People will just eat blood, contrary to what the Apostle Paul and everything said. Oh yeah, Philip Lee liked that line. Nice. But yeah, contrary to what the apostles said, including Paul. Paul signed up to that council. So it is, you can lose a lot by not having these kind of dietary restrictions, because what you do does enforce what you believe. It's one of these things C.S. Lewis was great at pointing out, because when he was trying to figure out what magic is and why people believe in like kind of ritual magic around the world. They will do certain things, they have certain effects. And it's like, why do we do that? And he was saying, we do kind of do these things. We do things that reinforce a certain idea. And he was having an example of modern magic. It's like switching on a light. People say, electricity works because of science, and science works because you're rational and you don't believe in silly fables like religion. So people who are atheists, but they don't really understand science that well, will reinforce their belief in atheism. Whenever they do these sort of things, they switch on a light, that's like magic to them. Because we do that. We believe by doing things, and we do things that we believe. Like they're hand in hand, isn't it? So that's
why in the Exodus, or in those laws, God, so many of them are physical. Like the Passover blood, he wants you to do things. Or... especially when you eat it, you're meant to get in your travel clothes. Even though it might be during the actual time they had some time to kind of pack up. It's not, but still the Lord's like, but it's the thought. Yeah. When you eat this, do it as if you're ready to get going. You're ready to escape.
Yeah. And so I think it is very important to remember that when Paul's saying like these rules, they're not super necessary. So when you have Titus, his friend, who's uncircumcised, and he often uses him as an example. And he's like, look, he's done that, but he really gets the message because he does other stuff for the Lord, in his own way. And then people use that stuff that Paul's saying to say, like, so we don't have to bother with anything. And that's not what Paul's saying at all. He's just saying, there's like, people who aren't circumcised for good reason. But he's kind of like, he kind of did encourage some people to get circumcised, like Timothy and other. And he says in Romans, like, is there no profit to being circumcised? Absolutely not. There's loads of great stuff about being circumcised. He mentions that. That's his perspective. But he is like, no, in the end, that stuff doesn't matter. And you can be saved without doing it. But there is, like, profit in it. And if you're not doing anything for God, as some people don't, they're just like, I've said these kind of magic words that, a while ago. Now I'm just saved, so I don't really have to bother with... Or even if they're like, I'll bother with these moral things. I've decided what the moral laws in the Bible. But I won't take... There's little things that don't matter. That also isn't good. Like, our daily life has to matter.
In the Bible, there's so many shocking events where one... being Moses and Zipporah as they're leaving, and then Moses presumably either forgot or maybe deliberately didn't circumcise his kid. And Jesus starts marching out, about to kill them, and so Zipporah has to do that emergency circumcision. But it's the very fact she did that act. Yeah. And she did that act she knew this was important to God, and so did it. But then, of course, there are, like, we know, I mean, it's not obviously the whole point is it's not circumcision's the saving thing. Yeah. Because, as we can see later, God allows that newer generation in the exile, the Exodus, to go years without getting like almost decades really, without getting circumcised.
And Abraham goes like 100 years.
Yeah, doesn't he? Exactly. And Enoch.
Yeah.
One of the most faithful people ever, probably not circumcised at all.
And they're so important because those are the examples Paul uses, isn't it? He says, we know we don't have to be circumcised because Abraham wasn't circumcised and he was saved by faith. And so then it's like, but was Abraham totally without, ritual and fasting and,
So, no. Again, the physical acts were very, very important. Yeah. Obviously, another great one example of the Rechabites. Oh, that's another great one where
I love them.
They kind of just come up with this.
In-laws.
Yeah. They come up with this kind of law. They're like, we're gonna do this for God. Yeah. And then essentially, like with Jeremiah, I believe, is it Jeremiah 16? I can't remember. It's in Jeremiah, the Rechabites. And yeah, they just follow this kind of tradition and family rules. And then God's like really proud of them and pleased with them. And because they essentially just did something for him. It's because, again, it's the heart that matters and the physical acts. So it's not just the heart.
Yeah.
It's the heart, when applied, is this kind of wonderful thing.
And you think, so they're these Midianites who, and you think, so they're like a Gentile nation, so they're not beholden to all these rules. So do they just think, oh yeah, we're totally free, we don't have to bother with this stuff? Actually, they decide, let's bother even more. Let's let's do loads of stuff to set ourselves apart. And maybe actually for them, there's more of a push, because it's like, some of the other Midianites we hear about aren't that great. So they've got to make more of a thing about it.
Because one of the things they do is live in tents. So, and you presume, this is, of course, they were around the time with the Midianite people, not that family, well, no, actually, maybe. They're around this time when the church was also living in tents and then not living in tents anymore. So they may have had this experience of, they're softening. We're going to keep strong.
And there's something to be said about it, because the Rechabites, they didn't fall into these idols and things. But if they made tent living an idol, and that would have been a problem.
Definitely.
So we've got to say that. But, it happened not to. They happened to keep their eyes fixed on Jesus. And these signs and these practices helped. So, isn't it? Totally. They are an amazing example. And Moses' in-laws, and they kind of remind us sometimes of what Israel could have been. Because some people are so hopeless, they're like, oh, it's a pointless project all the way through. And God just did it to show, look how pointless the whole project is. No, because the Rechabites, they care, they have their hearts fixed on Jesus, and so they do things to please him, and it does please Jesus, and it sees them through.
So those acts are important. That's the kind of brilliant. The acts are important, but obviously it's the trusting Jesus as you do them. It's the combination, as James kind of talks about, that the faith and works together are a really amazing thing. But do it one or the other doesn't really work. And as James makes, you can't just simply
believe your way into getting saved.
Essentially, if you're not doing anything, because Jesus has the parable of those two sons, isn't it? One who says he'll do what the Father wants him to, the one who, but then so he says he does, and he doesn't do it. The other son says he won't, and then he does do it. So again, it's
and you have those little I suppose footnotes or provisos you have to where it's like, because James has the example of the demons, and of course the demons believe but they don't repent of their sin. Whereas we might find ourselves falling into the same sins and everything. Of course, Jesus will forgive us, and we remember all that. That we don't need a perfect run for the moment of our baptism. There were some early church groups that thought that, and then the church stood against it. They're like, no, you don't. The Lord will forgive us infinite times, and we just have to keep doing that. To an extent, that's the problem with the demons. They're never sorry for the evils they do. So there's that as well. We remember we don't have to have a perfect run and everything. So people often bring that up, and it's like, so we're not saved by our own perfect life. We cannot be. But that also, again, isn't it? It's that when we understand all the apostles together, when we're reading it all through, it's like this stuff does matter, and we should be trying, and repentance is trying to do better, even if you don't always succeed. But if you're doing it for Jesus, it counts for something. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so I'm just looking at time. We do have some further questions, but partly due to some tech issues, and I think sometimes we also did have some good tangents, great tangents, I think, but we did have some tangents. So we do have another question, which we'll have to cover next time, is, does it matter which Bible translation we use?
But just quickly, do use the Brenton. Brenton translated the Septuagint. You can use it online. Is it Bible Hub has it?
I believe so, so simple answer is that we will have a longer answer, though, because we want to talk a little bit about that. The simple Septuagint, it's the best and the oldest. So that's one question we're going to try and cover. And we also have some big questions for next month about kind of some of the eternal life, what happens after you die questions. We've got a few of those we like to do.
Dad has written a book on it, hasn't he? The Great Unknown. So if you're dying to get into it and you've got burning questions, because, that is a burning question people have, do get that book, isn't it? I think it's on Amazon.
I wonder if there might be next month we'll get one from our bookcase. We have one So we'll get that.
Yeah, we've got several copies around the house,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's just when you need
So-
it, where is it?
I know, because I think
Yeah.
most of ours are still boxed up.
Fair enough.
Most of our books, yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, those are
the
boxed.
great unknown.
Yeah, so if you'd like to look, we can leave that link in the description. But we'll show you the book next month,
Yeah.
and we want to talk about that topic. But it has already been covered in a book, if you'd like. But we'll show that and talk through that next month. Yeah, the hell question. So we have a few hell questions, and they're awesome. I think 3 we've got. One about Oregon, which you mentioned today, but we won't get into that now.
It's true.
So we'll cover that next month. Just to quickly end, this is the Bible School Show live Q&A. If you'd like to join the Bible School Show, we obviously here we kind of get to go off on tangents and just talk about things that we don't really get to talk about in the course, or we get to hint on. But if you'd like to join the Bible School Show, you can on the website bibleschool.show, and you can have a look. As I said at the beginning, there's a sample show, so if you are on the fence, you can just watch a show, and then if you like it, there's an option to kind of join and subscribe. If not, don't worry, but you can see a whole show for free. Okay.
And just quickly, if I could plug because we were talking about about the flight to
We've
Egypt,
got 2 books
Candlemas.
yeah.
On the Patreon website, you can have early access to
Global Church History Project.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So the Global Church History Project, you work on that. On this project, really, it's in the name. It's to get church history from all over the world, because there is this strong belief that these apostles went all over the world, and there are these kind of very old stories, both of the apostles and the churches in those areas. Anyway, so it's part of a project to get church history from all over the world, and you're on that team, and you're working on that. And they recently published a book for Candlemas.
Yeah. Oh, well, so there's a preview available on the Patreon, so we're still working on it.
Oh, yeah.
There's still a bit to go. It turned out to be a bigger project than we were
Huge.
anticipating.
Bigger than the Michaelmas, and
but bigger than both them combined, isn't it?
Book of the 12, even, was it?
Well, it's coming up to about as big as Book of the 12, so it's a good one. But there's a preview available of like an early version. While it's still Candlemas time, because I think Carnival is only on is it the 13th? I think Carnival, or I think it's early this year.
Yeah.
So. Although is that totally the earliest it can be is the 4th, which is why Flight to Egypt is then. So you're not allowed a day off in Lent, you know.
Awesome.
So so Candlemas Tide, can be that short. But it's not that short. So there's still a bit of time, and there's some stuff involved for Candlemas, and like, how should we be celebrating Candlemas Tide?
There's
in
even
that book.
Recipes, isn't it? So, just as a
although
hint,
that will be in the final. I think the preview doesn't quite have that yet, but we do have some. They'll be delicious, and you want them ready for Carnival, don't you?
Yeah. That's a spoiler, so forget that. Everyone forget that. But it's going to be awesome, and again, just looking at how everyone celebrates these. Yes, so in the description, I'll edit this after. We're going to have a link to The Great Unknown by Paul Blackham. That's looking at some of these life after death questions. And then we're also going to have a link to the Patreon for the Global Church History Project, if you'd like to either preview that book, if you'd like to join the Patreon, or have a look at, there are these posts that come out, is it every month?
Those, and those are quite longer, those ones.
Yeah.
But we have the daily on Facebook. You see those daily ones. You get the longer versions with notes on loads of them and bibliography and things. So if you want that, so you can get a bit of Candlemas and Flight to Egypt and everything, because it's a bit of a higher tier to get the book previews. But even if you're on a lower tier, you can get all these kind of ones. You can find out like a longer thing on Candlemas. Some of this Flight to Egypt, we have a few days that covers it. And so
in the earlier, I know I always mention this, but Dogheads as well.
Oh, yeah.
We've got all those posts if you'd like to look at those stories. Maps as well. The team makes maps and things like that. Anyway, so that's for the plug. So we'll have a link to those 2 things if you'd like to check them out, and hopefully we will see you next month. Oh, right, hang on. I totally forgotten. There is one other really big bit of news on the Bible School Show. and that is we are this Sunday is when we're going to start the next term of the Bible School Show, the 5th term. We're going to send out an email just to double check. I'm pretty sure it's this week. It'll either be this week or the next week, but I'm pretty sure it's this week.
Just in time for Lent.
Yeah. So feel free to keep checking up on the website. We'll try and update things for then. It's ready for the 5th term of the Bible School Show. If you want to join, ready for then. Okay. I think that's all the links. So hope everyone has a great February, great Lent beginning to it, and we'll hopefully see you next month for our live Q&A. Thanks, and see you then.